The Great Hall of Valanthos Prime had not seen such a gathering in over 2,000 years. Representatives from 17 spacefaring civilizations sat in their designated sections, each one watching the others with a mixture of curiosity and ancient rivalry. The station itself was older than most of their empires, built by a species that had long since vanished into the dark between galaxies, leaving behind only their architecture and their warnings. Elder Voreth moved slowly to the central platform. His body was not made of flesh and bone like most of the beings in this chamber. He was something older, something that had evolved beyond the need for solid form. His translucent shape shimmered with colors that had no names in any language spoken here. His eyes held the weight of 8,000 years of memory. He had watched civilizations rise and fall. He had seen wars that burned across entire spiral arms. He had learned, through painful experience, that the most dangerous creatures in the universe were not always the largest or the strongest. "I have called this assembly," Voreth said, his voice resonating through the universal translators that every species wore, "to discuss the newest civilization to achieve interstellar travel. They call themselves humans. They come from a small blue world in the outer reaches of the Orion Arm, and they have been expanding into nearby systems for the past century." A ripple of murmurs passed through the chamber. Most of the representatives had heard of humans, but few had paid them much attention. They were a young species, barely a footnote in the grand history of the galaxy. Commander Xerax of the Torvelian Empire leaned forward in his seat. He was an impressive creature, standing nearly 3 meters tall when upright, his body covered in natural armor that had evolved over millions of years of predatory dominance. His species had conquered 47 worlds through military force, and they considered themselves the rightful rulers of this region of space. To Xerax, the idea of concerning himself with some primitive newcomers was almost insulting, Elder Xerax said, his voice carrying the dismissive tone of someone who had never known defeat. "Why should this assembly concern itself with these humans? Our scouts have observed them. They are fragile creatures with short lifespans. Their ships are slow and poorly armed. They pose no threat to any established power." Voreth turned his ancient gaze toward the Torvelian commander. "That is precisely why I have called this meeting, Commander. Because you see only what is on the surface. You measure threat by size and firepower and fleet numbers. And in doing so, you make the same mistake that has destroyed greater empires than yours." The chamber fell silent. No one spoke to the Torvelian Empire with such directness. No one except Voreth, who had been ancient when the Torvelians were still hunting prey on their homeworld. "I have studied these humans," Voreth continued. "I have watched them since they first looked up at their night sky and wondered what the lights were. I have observed them through their long and bloody history, through their wars and their plagues and their disasters, and I must warn all of you, with every ounce of wisdom I have gathered across 8 millennia, do not provoke them, do not threaten them, and above all else, do not harm their children." Laughter echoed through the hall. Ambassador Phila of the Meridian Collective, an insectoid being whose species communicated through a complex series of clicks and chemical signals, rose from her seat. "With the greatest respect for your age and experience, I must question this assessment. The Meridian Collective has conquered species far more formidable than these humans. We have subdued worlds defended by beings who could survive in the vacuum of space, who could regenerate from any wound, who could communicate across vast distances through thought alone. What could these soft, short-lived creatures possibly do that should concern us?" Voreth was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost sad. "I watched them fight each other," he said. "For thousands of years before they ever reached the stars, I watched them wage war upon their own kind. They burned their own cities. They poisoned their own lands. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization. Weapons that could crack the crust of their planet and turn their blue world into a dead rock. And do you know what they did with these weapons? They built more of them. They built enough to destroy themselves 100 times over. Not because it was logical, not because it made strategic sense, but because they refused to be the ones who lost." Letting his words sink in, "They call this quality many things: stubbornness, pride, determination. But there is another word they use, one that does not translate well into most languages. They call it spite. The willingness to suffer any pain, to accept any loss, to destroy everything, including themselves. Rather than submit to what they perceive as evil, Zirax made a sound of contempt. This is the weakness of prey animals. They fight because they have no other choice. When faced with true power, they will submit like all the others. No, Varath said firmly. You do not understand. Other species fight to survive. Other species calculate odds and make rational decisions about when to surrender. Humans do not think this way. When you threaten their families, when you endanger their children, something changes in them. They stop calculating. They stop caring about survival. They become willing to trade their own lives, their own worlds, their own future. For the chance to hurt you back, the elder moved closer to the Torvelian delegation, his form casting strange shadows in the artificial light. I have seen what happens when humans decide that they have nothing left to lose. I have watched them charge fortified positions with no hope of survival. I have watched them strap explosives to their own bodies and walk into enemy strongholds. I have watched them keep fighting with wounds that would kill any other creature. Keep firing their weapons with hands that could no longer feel. Keep crawling toward their enemies when their legs had been torn away. And that was against each other, Vorith said quietly. Against their own brothers and sisters. Imagine what they would do to beings they see as true enemies. Beings who murdered their children. Commander Zirax stood now, his full height dominating the chamber. Enough of this fear-mongering, Elder. The Torvelian Empire has identified 3 human colony worlds in the Nexar system. They are rich in minerals and strategically valuable. We will take them, as we have taken so many others, and humanity will learn their place in this galaxy. They will kneel, or they will be destroyed. Vorith looked at the commander for a long time. And those who were close enough to see his ancient eyes said later that they saw something there that might have been pity. Then you have already doomed your empire, Vorith said. And when the humans come for you, when they burn your worlds and scatter your fleets and stand over the ashes of everything you built, remember that I tried to warn you. Remember that you had the chance to choose peace, and you chose arrogance instead. Zirax laughed and turned to leave, his generals following behind him. The other representatives began to disperse as well, most of them convinced that the old elder had finally lost his mind. Only Vorath remained in the empty chamber, his ancient form flickering with grief. I tried, he whispered to the silence. When the screaming begins, let it be known that I tried. 3 months passed after the assembly on Valanthos Prime. 3 months in which the Torvelian Empire gathered its forces and planned its conquest. 3 months in which the humans on Nova Haven continued their lives without any knowledge of what was coming for them. Admiral Krath commanded the Torvelian Third Fleet from the bridge of the dreadnought Ironclad. He was older than Zirax, but no less ambitious, and he had been given the honor of leading this conquest personally. 40 warships followed his command, each one carrying weapons that had crushed rebellions and broken the will of entire civilizations. To Krath, this mission was nothing more than routine. Another world to take. Another species to teach their place. The fleet emerged from hyperspace, above Nova Haven, just as the morning sun was rising over its largest continent. From orbit, the planet looked peaceful and green, covered in forests and farmland and the scattered lights of human cities. 3 million people lived here. They had built schools and hospitals and markets. They had planted gardens and raised families and dreamed of the future. None of them knew that their future had just ended. Admiral, the communications officer reported, we are receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. A human male is requesting to speak with our commander. Krath settled into his command chair with the casual arrogance of a predator who had never been prey. Put him through. Let us hear what the cattle have to say. The holographic image appeared before him, showing a human of middle age, with graying hair and tired eyes. He wore simple clothes and stood in what appeared to be a government office. His name was Lucas Webb, and he had been the governor of Nova Haven for 12 years. The Torvelian vessels, Webb said, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone trying very hard to remain calm. This is Governor Lucas Webb. We have received no notification of your arrival. Please state your intentions. Admiral Krath studied the human with mild curiosity. He had seen many species beg for mercy over the centuries, and he wondered how long it would take this one to start. Governor Webb, Krath replied, your world and all its resources now belong to the Torvelian Empire. You will surrender your population for labor allocation, and your planet will be stripped of its minerals. Any resistance will be dealt with harshly. You have 1 hour to begin evacuating your people to our processing ships. There was a moment of silence. Krath watched the human's face carefully, expecting to see fear or despair, or the beginning of tears. Instead, he saw something else. The confusion in Webb's eyes faded away, replaced by a cold hardness that the Admiral had not expected. Labor allocation, Webb said slowly. You mean slavery? Call it whatever you wish. The result will be the same. Admiral, there are 3 million people on this world. 600,000 of them are children, babies, toddlers, kids who have not even learned to read yet. Webb's voice was quiet but steady. If you do this, you will be making a mistake that your empire will not survive. Krath leaned forward with interest. Is that a threat, Governor? From a man with no ships and no weapons? It is not a threat from me, Webb replied. It is a promise from every human who will ever learn what you did here today. You do not understand what you are about to unleash. You think you know war? You think you know what it means to fight an enemy who will not surrender. But you have never faced anything like what is coming for you. I grow tired of human arrogance, Krath said with a wave of his clawed hand. You have 50 minutes remaining. Use them wisely. The transmission ended and Webb stood alone in his office. His hands were shaking now, but not from fear. Grace Porter, his young assistant, stood nearby with tears running down her face. Sir, what do we do? We have no defenses. No fleet. Nothing that can stop them. Webb was silent for a long moment. He thought about his wife back on Earth, about the grandchildren he had hoped to meet someday, about all the things he would never get to do. Then he walked to his desk and opened a secure channel. This is Governor Lucas Webb of Nova Haven. Transmitting to United Earth Command on Emergency Frequency Alpha. We are under attack by the Torvelian Empire. 40 warships in orbit. They intend to enslave our entire population. 3 million souls. 600,000 children. He paused to steady his voice. I am activating the Prometheus Protocol. Tell Earth what happened here. Tell them everything. And tell my wife that I love her more than she will ever know. He closed the channel and turned to Grace. Get to the shelters. Take as many people as you can. Maybe some of you will survive long enough for rescue. What about you, sir? Webb looked out the window at the morning sky, where dark shapes were beginning to descend through the clouds. I am going to stay here and make sure this transmission reaches Earth. Someone has to bear witness. 47 minutes later, the orbital bombardment began. The first plasma strikes hit the capital city at 7:23 in the morning. Schools had just opened for the day. Parents had just dropped off their children and headed to work. The strikes turned everything within a 10-kilometer radius into ash and glass. Then the Torvelian landing craft descended, and the real horror began. On Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral Catherine Cole received the transmission in the secure bunker that served as humanity's military command center. She was 53 years old, a career officer who had spent her life preparing for a war she hoped would never come. She had gray in her hair and lines on her face and a heart that had never known the weight it was about to carry. She listened to Governor Webb's final words. She watched the satellite feeds as fire rained down from the sky. She saw the schools burning, the hospitals collapsing, the streets filled with running people who had nowhere to run. Around her, the Joint Chiefs sat in stunned silence. General Samuel Knox, the oldest among them, was the first to speak. 3 million, he said softly. They killed 3 million civilians in less than an hour. 600,000 children, Admiral Cole replied. Her voice was steady, but her hands had curled into fists, so tight that her nails drew blood from her palms. The Torvelians have 47 conquered worlds. A fleet of 3,000 warships. We have 200. Cannot win a conventional war against them, Knox said. Cole agreed. We cannot. She stood and walked to the central display that showed humanity's territory in the galaxy. It was so small. A handful of stars in the vast darkness. Barely a footnote compared to the great empires that surrounded them. Then she turned to face her officers. And they saw something in her eyes that none of them had ever seen before. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was something much older and much more dangerous. Issue a general mobilization, she said. Every shipyard works day and night. Every factory converts to military production. Every civilian vessel is retrofitted for combat. Every human who can hold a weapon receives training. Admiral, even with total mobilization, we are looking at years before we can match their numbers. Then we do not match their numbers. We exceed them. She pulled up another display showing classified research projects. Weapons systems that had been deemed too dangerous to ever use. Technologies that humanity had locked away because they were afraid of what they might become. The Torvelians fight wars of conquest. Quick strikes, minimal losses, move on to the next target. They have never faced an enemy who would burn everything to ashes just to see them burn with it. She turned to her communications officer. Send a message to the Torvelian Empire. Tell them we reject their claim to our territory. Tell them we will not negotiate. Tell them we will not surrender. And tell them that for every human life they took today, we will take 10,000 of theirs. General Knox shifted uncomfortably. Admiral, that kind of language will escalate this beyond anything we can control. Catherine Cole looked at him with eyes that had gone cold and flat like the depths of space. Samuel, they murdered 600,000 children this morning. I do not want to control this. I want the galaxy to learn what happens when you harm our young. I want them to remember this lesson for 10,000 years. She turned back to the display, watching the death toll climb higher and higher. We are going to war, and we are not going to stop until every Torvelian who had a hand in this is dead. And their empire is nothing but ashes and memory. The Torvelian Empire expected humanity to surrender within weeks. They had seen it happen countless times before. A quick show of force, a few destroyed cities, and the conquered species would fall in line like all the others. They would beg for mercy and accept their chains and become another. Footnote in the long history of Torvelian dominance. But weeks passed, and no surrender came. Months passed, and the humans only grew more determined. By the end of the first year, Torvelians began to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. It started with small things. Supply convoys that vanished without a trace. Military outposts that went silent in the middle of the night. Officers who were found dead in their quarters with no sign of how the killer had entered or escaped. The humans could not match the Torvelian fleet in open battle, so they did not try. Instead, they became ghosts. They became shadows. They became the thing that Torvelian soldiers learned to fear in the dark. Daniel Park was one of these ghosts. He was 31 years old, a former schoolteacher who had lost his entire family on Nova Haven. His wife, his daughter, his parents, his sister, and her children. All of them gone in the fire that fell from the sky. When he heard the news, something inside him went quiet and cold. And he walked into a military recruitment center and asked to be trained for the most dangerous missions they had. Now he crouched in the darkness of an air vent on the conquered world of Venthos 3, watching Torvelian soldiers patrol the corridor below. There were 50,000 of them on this planet, controlling a population of 2 million aliens who had been enslaved decades ago. The garrison was built around a massive fusion reactor that powered the entire military complex. Daniel was not alone. 2 other humans moved silently beside him. A woman named Lisa Huang and a man named Christopher Bell. They had trained together, fought together, and watched friends die together. They did not speak now. They did not need to. Each of them knew exactly what they had come here to do. The plan was simple. Reach the reactor core. Plant the charges. Get out before everything went up in flames. The chances of survival were less than 20%. And all 3 of them had accepted those odds without hesitation. They moved through the vents like water flowing through cracks, avoiding sensors and patrols with the patience of predators who had all the time in the world. It took them 6 hours to reach the reactor room, and when they finally dropped down into the massive chamber, they found it guarded by only a handful of technicians. The technicians did not even have time to scream. Daniel planted the charges while Lisa and Christopher watched the doors. His hands were steady. His heart was calm. He thought about his daughter, about the way she used to laugh when he tickled her feet, about the drawing she made for him that he had kept on his desk at school. He thought about how she had been afraid of the dark, and how he used to tell her that there was nothing in the darkness that could hurt her. He had been wrong about that. "Charges set," he said quietly. 60 seconds. They ran. They ran faster than they had ever run in their lives. Through corridors and up stairwells, and past guards who barely had time to raise their weapons before they were gone, they reached the surface with 8 seconds to spare, threw themselves into the escape shuttle that was waiting for them, and launched into the sky just as the world below turned white. The explosion killed every Torvelian on the planet. 50,000 soldiers vaporized in an instant. The enslaved population survived because the humans had warned them through secret channels, had told them to move to the shelters on the far side of the planet, had given them hope for the first time in generations. 2 million slaves went free that day, and the Torvelian Empire learned that nowhere was safe. Commander Xerax, now holding the title of Supreme Commander of all Torvelian forces, received the news in his war room on the Imperial homeworld. He stared at the report for a long time, his clawed hands gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks in the metal. How, he demanded. How did 3 humans destroy an entire garrison? His intelligence officer, a nervous creature named Prill, pulled up the analysis on the central display. "Supreme Commander, our strategists believe the humans have developed a new form of warfare. They call it asymmetric engagement. They use small teams with precise intelligence to strike at vulnerable points, causing damage far beyond what their numbers would suggest. They do not fight like any species we have encountered before. Then we destroy their homeworld, burn Earth to ash, and end this at the source. Sir, our scouts report that Earth has been heavily fortified over the past year. They have constructed a defense network of unprecedented density. Our fleet would suffer catastrophic losses attempting to breach it. The humans seem to have anticipated this strategy." Xerax slammed his fist against the console. "Then we blockade their systems, cut them off from resources, starve them into submission. They anticipated this as well, Supreme Commander. Human civilian ships have been dispersing throughout neutral space, establishing hidden supply caches in locations we cannot find. Several unaligned species have begun trading with them in secret, providing food and materials in exchange for human technology and protection. Then we make examples. Destroy any world that aids them." Prill hesitated before speaking again. "With respect, Supreme Commander, that approach may create more enemies than it eliminates. The other powers are already watching this conflict with great interest. If we appear too aggressive, we may drive them into alliance with the humans." Xerax turned away from his officer and stared out the window at the stars. For the first time in his long life, he felt something that might have been doubt. 3 years into the war, the galaxy had changed. The Torvelian Empire, once feared and respected by all, had become something else entirely. They had become prey. Human shipyards worked without rest, producing warships at a rate that stunned every observer. Factories that once built farming equipment now built weapons. Schools taught children how to fight. Hospitals trained doctors for battlefield surgery. An entire species had transformed itself into a machine designed for one purpose. It's a complete destruction of the Torvelian Empire. Captain Maria Santos commanded the destroyer Relentless, one of 500 new ships that had joined the human fleet in the past year alone. She was 31 years old, the same age Daniel Park had been when he walked into that recruitment center. Her younger brother had been a teacher on Nova Haven. He had been in his classroom when the fire came. She stood on the bridge of her ship as it emerged from hyperspace alongside 40 others. Their target was a Torvelian military station in the Krellis system, a massive installation that serviced a significant portion of the enemy fleet. "Enemy vessels detected," her tactical officer reported. 12 warships. 3 heavy cruisers. "They outgun us significantly." "They always do," Santos replied. Launch the drones. 200 automated drones scattered from the human formation and accelerated toward the station at speeds no living pilot could survive. The Torvelians detected them too late. Their point defense systems tried to intercept, but there were too many drones moving too fast, and the station vanished in a cascade of nuclear fire. Enemy ships moving to engage, the tactical officer said. All vessels. Attack pattern Omega. Focus fire on the lead cruiser. The battle lasted 17 minutes. 8 human ships were destroyed. All 12 Torvelian vessels were reduced to drifting wreckage. Captain Santos watched the debris field on her display and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Record this engagement and transmit to High Command, she ordered, and include a message for the Torvelian Supreme Commander. 8. Santos thought about her brother, about the children who never came home from school that day, about the empty chairs at dinner tables across 100 human worlds. Tell him we are just getting started? 7 years had passed since the fires fell on Nova Haven. 7 years of blood and death and endless war. 7 years that had transformed both species in ways that neither could have imagined. When the first shots were fired, Supreme Commander Xyrax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Conqueror, and looked out at what remained of his empire. Where once he had commanded 3,000 warships, fewer than 400 still answered his calls. Ere once he had ruled 47 worlds. Only the Torvelian homeworld and a handful of nearby colonies remained under his control. The great empire that his ancestors had built over centuries was crumbling around him. There was nothing he could do to stop it. 32 of their conquered worlds had risen in rebellion. Inspired by human agents who had slipped through Torvelian security and armed the oppressed populations, supply lines had been cut so many times that the Imperial fleet could barely keep itself fueled and fed. Officers who had once been loyal were now whispering about surrender, about negotiation, about finding some way to end this nightmare before everything was lost. And now the humans were coming for the homeworld itself. Admiral Catherine Coles. Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, surrounding the Torvelian home system like a noose tightening around a throat. She commanded over 2,000 ships now, built by human hands and crewed by human hearts, that burned with 7 years of accumulated grief and rage. Allied vessels from a dozen species who had suffered under Torvelian rule flew alongside them, eager to witness the fall of their former masters. Cole stood on the bridge of her flagship, the carrier Remembrance. She was 60 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face marked by the weight of command. She had sent thousands of young men and women to their deaths over the past 7 years. She had made decisions that haunted her dreams. She had become something harder and colder than the woman she had been before Nova Haven. But she had never lost sight of why she was fighting. She had never forgotten the children. Admiral Herr, communications officer, reported, "We are being hailed by the Torvelian flagship. Put him through." The holographic image of Supreme Commander Xyrax appeared before her. He looked different than he had in the recordings she had studied. Older, tired. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before. That might have been fear, or might have been the beginning of understanding. Admiral Cole, Xerox said, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had marked his species for so long. "I am prepared to discuss terms of surrender." Cole studied him for a moment before responding. "There will be no discussion, Supreme Commander. There will be no negotiation. You will surrender unconditionally, or you will be destroyed. Those are your only options. Surely there is room for compromise. The war has cost both our peoples greatly. Continued fighting benefits no one." "You should have thought about that 7 years ago," Cole replied. "You should have thought about that before you murdered 3 million of my people, before you burned 600,000 children alive in their schools and their homes, before you tried to enslave an entire species because you thought we were too weak to stop you." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "I am not here to compromise, Supreme Commander. I am here to deliver the consequence of your actions. Your fleet will be destroyed. Your military infrastructure will be dismantled. Your leaders will stand trial for crimes against humanity. This is not negotiable." Xerax's expression hardened. "If we refuse, if we fight to the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath, Then you will die, Cole said simply. All of you. Every warrior, every general, every politician who authorized this war. We have come too far and lost too much to accept anything less than complete surrender. You would commit genocide against my people. Cole shook her head slowly. No, Supreme Commander. We do not kill civilians. We do not bomb schools. We do not enslave children. We are not you. Her voice dropped lower. But your military? Your empire? Everything you built on the corpses of conquered peoples? That ends today, one way or another. The transmission ended, and Zirak stood alone on his bridge for a long moment. His officers watched him in silence, waiting for orders, waiting for some sign of what they should do. For the first time in 300 years of military service, Zirak did not know what to say. All ships, he finally commanded, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. Prepare for battle. We will not surrender. We will not beg. We will die as Torvelians, with weapons in our hands and defiance in our hearts. The battle began at dawn, as measured by the Torvelian homeworld below. Captain Maria Santos, now commanding. The heavy cruiser Vengeance led the third assault wave into the heart of the enemy formation. Her ship had been in 47 engagements over the past 7 years. Her crew had been replaced 3 times over as casualties mounted. She herself carried scars from a hull breach that had nearly killed her 2 years earlier. White lines across her face and arms that would never fade. None of it mattered now. They were here, at the end of everything, and she intended to see it through. Enemy formation is breaking, her tactical officer reported. Their flagship is attempting to retreat toward the hyperspace corridor. No, Santos said firmly. He does not get to run. All ships in Strike Group 7 concentrate fire on the Conqueror. He dies here today. 40 human warships converged on the Torvelian flagship. Plasma fire and missile salvos turned the space around it into a storm of destruction. The Conqueror's shields held for 11 minutes before they finally collapsed. Its engines failed at 13 minutes. At 17 minutes, the reactor went critical. Supreme Commander Zyrax died in the explosion, along with his command staff. And 3,000 Torvelian warriors who had followed him to the end. He never surrendered. He never begged. In the final moment, as fire consumed his bridge, he simply closed his eyes and accepted what he had earned. The battle raged for 18 hours. By the time it ended, the Torvelian fleet had ceased to exist. 400 warships reduced to drifting wreckage, scattered across the darkness of space like fallen leaves. Admiral Cole stood on the Bridge of Remembrance and watched the last enemy vessel break apart under concentrated fire. Around her, the bridge crew sat in exhausted silence. Some of them were crying. Some of them were simply staring at nothing, too tired to feel anything at all. Admiral Harade said softly, "It is over." Cole did not respond immediately. She thought about Nova Haven. She thought about Governor Webb's final transmission. She thought about the children who would never grow up, the parents who would never hold their babies again, the futures that had been erased in an afternoon of fire and death. She thought about the price humanity had paid to reach this moment. The millions who had died, the worlds that had burned, the innocence that could never be recovered. "Send a message to the Torvelian civilian government," she finally said. "Tell them the war is over. Tell them we are prepared to accept their unconditional surrender. Tell them that if they cooperate, we will not harm their civilian population. Their children will be safe. Their homes will not burn, and if they refuse..." Cole turned to look at her aide with tired eyes. "They will not refuse. They have seen what we are capable of. They have learned what happens when you threaten our young." She paused. "And they know that, unlike the Torvelians, we keep our word. We do not punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty." She turned back to the viewport, looking down at the Torvelian homeworld far below. Millions of civilians lived there, going about their lives, waiting to learn their fate. "We won," she said quietly. "Now we have to prove that we deserve to." 5 years had passed since the guns went silent above the Torvelian homeworld. 5 years of rebuilding, of healing, of learning how to live in a galaxy that had been forever changed by the war that humanity had fought and won. The great hall of Valanthos Prime was full once again, but the gathering looked nothing like it had 12 years earlier. Where once the Torvelian Empire had held the largest delegation, Now their seats were occupied by a small group of diplomats who spoke softly and kept their eyes lowered. Where once 17 species had debated the fate of a young civilization called humanity, now 32 newly freed worlds sent their own representatives to speak with voices that had been silenced for generations. Elder Vorath still presided over the assembly, his ancient form shimmering with the same light that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires. But he no longer stood alone at the center of the chamber. Beside him sat Admiral Catherine Cole, retired from military service, but serving now as humanity's chief ambassador to the galactic community. She was 68 years old. Her hair was completely white. Her hands, which had once signed orders sending thousands to their deaths, now signed treaties and trade agreements and declarations of friendship. The war had taken everything from her, and yet somehow she had found a way to keep going, to keep believing that the future could be better than the past. In the observer gallery above the main floor, a delegation of young Torvelians watched the proceedings in silence. They were the children of the warriors who had died in the war, raised in a world where their empire no longer existed and their species was learning to live as equals rather than conquerors. They had not been punished for the crimes of their parents. Their schools were still open. Their families were still together. Their future was still theirs to build. This was the choice humanity had made. Not vengeance, but justice. Not destruction, but redemption. Ambassador Phila of the Meridian Collective approached the central podium. Her species had once laughed at Elder Vorath's warnings about humanity. They were not laughing now. This assembly recognizes the representative of the United Human Confederacy, Phila announced. Her voice carrying through the vast chamber, Catherine Cole rose slowly from her seat and walked to the center of the floor. Every eye in the room followed her, watching the woman who had commanded the forces that brought down the mightiest empire the region had ever known. Distinguished representatives, she began, her voice clear and steady despite her age 12 years ago. Elder Vorath stood in this very chamber and warned you about humanity. He told you that we do not calculate odds the way you do. He told you that we do not surrender when logic says we should. He told you that when our children are threatened, we become something that your strategies cannot predict or contain. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the gathered aliens. He was right. And I stand before you today as proof of that warning. I commanded the forces that destroyed the Torvelian military. I gave the orders that killed millions of their soldiers. I watched their empire burn and I did not flinch. The chamber was completely silent. Even the youngest representatives understood the weight of what she was saying. I am not proud of everything we did in this war. I am not proud of the lives we took, even in pursuit of justice. War is never something to celebrate, even when it is necessary, even when there is no other choice. She took a breath before continuing. But I am proud that when the war ended, we did not become what we fought against. The Torvelian people still exist. Their children still laugh and play and dream about the future. Their culture still lives. Their history, even the dark parts, is still taught so that future generations can learn from it. We had the power to erase them completely. Some would say we had the right. We chose not to. She turned to look directly at the young Torvelians in the observer gallery, because that is also what it means to be human. We fight without mercy when we must. We protect our own with everything we have. We will burn the galaxy to ashes to keep our children safe. But we also know how to forgive when the fighting is done. We know how to rebuild what was broken. We know how to choose hope over hatred, even when hatred would be easier and forgiveness seems impossible. Elder Vorath nodded slowly, his ancient form rippling with what might have been approval or perhaps relief. He had warned them about what humanity could do when provoked. He had never told them what humanity could become when the danger had passed. Let this assembly serve as a reminder, Cole continued. To any species that might consider aggression against humanity or our allies, we do not seek war. We will exhaust every diplomatic option before we resort to force. We will talk and negotiate and compromise until there is truly no other path forward. Her voice hardened slightly. But if you harm our people, If you threaten our children, if you mistake our patience for weakness, or our kindness for cowardice, you will face the full fury of a species that has fought its way up from the caves to the stars by refusing to give up, by refusing to accept defeat, by refusing to stop fighting until our loved ones are safe. She stepped back from the podium. We would rather be your friends. We would rather trade and cooperate and explore the wonders of this galaxy together. But the choice is yours. It has always been yours. The assembly erupted in applause, a sound that had not been heard in this chamber for as long as anyone could remember. Species who had feared each other for millennia stood together and cheered for the small, fragile creatures who had taught them all what true strength looked like, far from Valantho's prime. On a quiet street in a small town in Montana, Daniel Park sat in a wooden chair on his front porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. He was 58 years old now, retired from the service that had consumed most of his adult life. His hair was gray. His body carried scars that would never fully heal. His dreams were still haunted by the things he had done and the people he had lost. But he was alive. Against all odds, he was still alive. The screen door creaked open behind him, and a small girl came running out onto the porch. She was 8 years old, with dark hair and bright eyes and a smile that reminded him so much of another little girl from another lifetime. Grandpa Danny. Mom says dinner is almost ready. Daniel smiled and pulled her into his lap. She was not his biological granddaughter. Her mother was a woman he had saved during a mission on one of the liberated worlds. A refugee who had come to Earth with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child growing in her belly. He had helped them get settled, had visited them when he could. And somehow, over the years, they had become the family he thought he had lost forever. Tell your mom I'll be there in a minute. Sweetheart, the girl nodded and ran back inside, her laughter echoing through the house. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to the sunset. He thought about the people he had killed, the battles he had fought, the years of blood and fire and desperate survival. He thought about what humanity had become in those dark years, and what they had chosen to become afterward. His communicator buzzed softly. A message from an old friend, letting him know that another memorial had been completed on Nova Haven. The planet was thriving now, rebuilt from the ashes. Home to 5 million people who had chosen to live where so many had died. They had named the Central Plaza after Governor Lucas Webb. A statue of him stood at its heart. Looking up at the sky with hope in his bronze eyes, Daniel read the message twice, then put the communicator away and watched the last light fade from the sky. Stars were beginning to appear, tiny points of light scattered across the darkness. Somewhere out there, human ships were traveling between those stars, carrying families and dreamers and children who had never known war. They were building colonies on distant worlds, making friends with alien species, writing the next chapter of humanity's story. It was a good story, Daniel thought. A story of pain and loss and terrible sacrifice, but also a story of courage and hope and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. He stood slowly, his old bones protesting, and walked inside to join his family for dinner. Behind him, the stars continued their eternal dance across the sky. Humanity had earned its place among them. They had paid for it in blood and tears and the lives of people they loved, and they would never let anyone take it from them again.